Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review in my car. I am trying to not talk too long today because it is an actually nice warm day outside, so my car is pretty toasty, but this is the only quiet place I have to do a review today, so we're making the best of it. Today I am going to be reviewing the 1969 runner-up, or one of the shortlisted finalists, for the 1969 Hugo Award for Best Novella. So I actually already read the winner of the 1969 Best Novella for the Hugo, and that was Night Wings by Robert Silverberg. I have the review on my channel if you want to check it out. I really enjoyed that novella, but I wanted to also read the shortlisted finalists as part of my challenge that I'm doing, which stay tuned and follow my reviews if you want to see me read the rest of the Hugo Award winners and shortlisted finalists. But I had to read the finalists for this year, and the first one that I tackled was Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. So this book is also the name Dragonflight, but it has the four novellas that I guess she wrote, or I think it's four novellas that she wrote that kind of make up one book, and this is volume 1 in the Dragonriders of Pern series. Anne McCaffrey is a staple in the sci-fi fantasy world, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard her name before. I had heard her name before reading this book, but I hadn't read anything by her. Now, Anne McCaffrey was actually a winner for the previous year Hugo Award with her book Where Search, which is also reviewed on my channel, and that is the first novella in this book. So when I checked this book out of the library, I didn't need to read the first novella in here. I could skip right to section 2, part 2, because I was familiar with part 1, and part 2 is Dragonflight. So Dragonflight follows our main character. It seems to follow naturally from the first novella, so I would recommend just getting this book and reading it, at least parts 1 and 2 together, so you have the background. Our main character, Lessa, has been chosen or has bonded with this dragon, and she's with the Were Riders, the people who are supposed to be protecting the planet. Now, something I didn't pick up on necessarily the first time, or when I was reading through this initially, was that this is actually a sci-fi setting. This world is set on a place where that Earth has colonized but since lost touch. And there's this thing called the Threads, which attacks the Earth. Now, I'm not really sure what Threads are. It was kind of left nebulous and ambiguous, but Threads attack the Earth, and the Were Riders, so the group that Les is now associated with, are supposed to be the people who protect the planet when these things happen. Les is kind of seeing the fact that the Were Riders, so the people who have this group, have kind of lost the faith, with the exception of a few of them. Most people believe the Threads are no longer a threat, and there's all these ancient legends that seem to encode a lot of information that Les is being taught, and it seems to foreshadow something going to happen in the future. So a big focus on this novella that was the finalist in 1969 for the Hugo Award for Best Novella is on these myths and legends, and the fact that this group of people is more of or viewed as like an antiquated group that doesn't really have a purpose anymore because the Threads have not attacked this planet in so long. So while the setting feels fantasy, it also has some sci-fi elements, which is super cool, but the focus is really on this group and the way that they've fallen and the way that they're not really prepared. And Lessa feels a little frustrated, not only by the fact that she feels like her personal abilities and skills are being crippled in this group, but also that things aren't being taken seriously, that she, as well as some other people, maybe feel could be taken a little bit more seriously, because otherwise they're not going to be prepared if this threat ever were to come back around. Something that I've noticed, and just noticed from reading other novellas and a lot of these other old sci-fi fantasy books, is these are written in a different time. This was written in the 1960s. Things were different back then. So all of these novellas, and also the novels that I've been reading, in my personal opinion, do not write very good female characters. And I'm not really a particular judge. I don't sit down with a clipboard and check through everything like, oh, you have 4 women but 5 men, so thumbs down, not enough women. Like, I'm not sitting down with the checklist and micro managing those sort of things, but you can really tell with some of these older books that just social conventions were different, and the way that the male writers who were writing these books wrote women was definitely in line with the social conventions of the day. Anne McCaffrey, you will notice, doesn't really have that problem, or not to the same extent. I feel like there maybe are some things that stand out that you think this is an older book and a little dated, but I think because she was a woman herself, she could see some of the things that were a little more ridiculous about the norms of the age, and she really wrote a female character that just stands out in comparison to the other women we've seen. And if you've read sci-fi or fantasy from this era, you tend to notice that I'm not micromanaging, I'm not like picking at the details here. There really are some, in my opinion, poorly written women in some of these books, just again due to social conventions. I do try to give them a little bit of a pass knowing the age of some of these books. But Anne McCaffrey, that's definitely something you don't notice, or that is a little better in my personal opinion than some of the other stuff written in the same time frame. Now, one thing that I think does date the book is the way that these names are written. I feel like it is a cliche at this point in fantasy novels that names are going to have a bunch of apostrophes. I feel like it feels very cliche, it feels overdone, but Anne McCaffrey utilizes that naming convention, for lack of a better word, in her book and with her character names, and I think it just dates the book a little bit, or it comes across as a little cliche, as a little something that's been done a number of times. But I think that maybe that hadn't been done as much when she wrote this back in 1969, 1968, whenever she wrote this. So I think it's fair to give her a little bit of a pass, as in I understand why she may have done this. However, as a modern reader, that does kind of date the book a little bit, and something to keep in mind and just note going in. It's going to have this kind of, at this point, almost a joke of a ridiculous, I mean, there was a ridiculous number of apostrophes in these people's names, and I feel like it just shows its age, and it is very notable to a modern reader. This is, again, enjoyable. It goes again with the Where Search, the first novella, so they do lead one into the other. There wasn't a lot of action, I would say, in this novella, but I think it set things up for at least the third part of this book, which I actually haven't read yet. So I think it just set things up really well, and I like the way that the book hinted at the fact that there was all these legends and myths which seem to convey or impart information, but that information has since been lost, so we're left with a myth or a legend or a poem or a song that seems to convey information that no longer has meaning, and also trying to deal with the fact that some people view them as irrelevant these days. It might be, it's like the group will have to reestablish why they're important before it's too late, before disaster strikes. So I do think it's enjoyable, and I think it's worth reading. I think if you enjoyed Where Search, you're also going to enjoy this one. You're going to enjoy the continuation of the characters. It may feel a little bit dated, but I don't think it's so bad that it'll deter a modern reader. It just shows its age, which is something that's unavoidable, and I really appreciate Anne McCaffrey putting this book out there. I believe she has since passed away, but yeah, I really think it's a cool book, and it's really interesting to read, and I'm glad that I'm reading one of the greats whose name I have been hearing about, or at least seeing in the public library since I was a very young girl. If you read this book or have any thoughts on it, please put something in the comments below. I love to hear it. I love to hear your recommendations. I love to hear what you think about the Dragonriders of Pern series or Anne McCaffrey overall. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your